We often look ahead, thinking about the future of war, but today, we really need to focus on something happening right now, something less visible. How critical knowledge, especially around drone warfare, travels beyond the battlefield.
That's absolutely right, and it's timely. As we're recording this, Ukrainian officials are actually in Washington. They're negotiating technology transfers, production partnerships, all very legitimate efforts to boost Allied defense using their, well, hard-won experience.
But the source material we're looking at today suggests there's another side to this coin, one that maybe isn't getting enough attention.
Exactly. We're drawing from excerpts of Killer Drone for Hire. It's by Lev Moten, PhD from N5 Digital Inc. He's a specialist in national security, non-proliferation specifically. And his report, it really highlights a potential consequence of this knowledge transfer that goes way beyond just military tech sharing.
Yeah, that forward warning in the paper really jumps out.
It does. The core worry is, okay, these battlefield lessons are being learned and shared. But what if the really specific stuff, the, quote, fine-grained how-to of remotely killing people more cheaply and anonymously, spreads without strong ethical rules, legal frameworks, and controls in place?
So the expertise doesn't just help allies, it could actually create, well, a whole new market for violence.
That's the grim possibility. Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the positive side, the security upside governments are looking for. What exactly are Western militaries hoping to sort of harvest from the Russia-Ukraine experience?
Well, the focus is mainly on making their own forces better, right? More effective, more resilient. So they're looking at affordability, how to do things cheaper. They're looking at new tactics for using lots of low-cost drones together, amassed concepts.
Things like dealing with jamming, staying connected.
Definitely. Communications resilience under heavy electronic warfare is huge. And critically, how to manage kinetic effects. Actual strikes, using supply chains that are basically civilian, getting parts, logistics. That kind of operational know-how is gold for a conventional military.
But, as you said, there's a flip side. Perfecting those systems in combat also means perfecting skills that become really dangerous if they leak out of state control. The dual-edged sword idea.
Precisely. The war hasn't just tested technology, it's actively refined specific, lethal human skills. And these are now being written down, codified, taught. We're talking about getting really good at spotting targets remotely, from far away.
And not just targets, but individuals.
Yes, the chilling process of stalking and targeting specific people. Then there were the coordinated swarm tactics designed specifically for lethal attacks. And, crucially, this very sophisticated electronic tradecraft ways to sneak past defenses.
Can you give an example? What does that electronic tradecraft look like if, say, a criminal group gets hold of it?
Well, it's all about making the attack untraceable, essentially. It could be knowing how to use readily available software to hide where the drone data is coming from or going, or bouncing signals around to mask the operator's location. Even things like GPS spoofing, making the drone itself report a false position if someone tries to track it back.
So it makes finding out who did it almost impossible after the fact.
Exactly. And you can see why that kind of skill would be incredibly valuable to, well, non-state actors, criminal organizations, terrorists.
And the real kicker here, according to the paper, isn't just cheap drones flooding the market. It's the people who've mastered these very specific, high-stakes killing techniques.
That's the absolute pivot point. Look, when this conflict eventually winds down, you're going to have potentially thousands of combat-experienced drone operators. Many are young, they possess these incredibly specialized lethal skills. But what are the peacetime job prospects back home?
Especially in economies potentially struggling after a war.
Right, so you have masters of remote violence, anonymity, distance. And they might suddenly be looking for work, available on the open market.
Now, some might say, hold on, governments invest in retraining programs for veterans. Is the issue really just a lack of jobs, or is there something inherent about the demand for this kind of deniable, precise violence that's the bigger problem?
It's probably both, honestly. But the potential demand is what's truly frightening. Think about it. Specialized training, networks built during wartime, plus this psychological aspect normalizing killing from a screen. It makes this labor pool uniquely volatile.
Which brings us to this historical comparison the paper makes, which seems odd at first glance. Prohibition in the U.S., 1920s, 30s, banning alcohol. How does that connect to drones?
Yeah, it sounds like a leap, but it's a really powerful analogy about how markets get created, even unintentionally. Prohibition was a legal ban, right? But it didn't stop drinking. It just created a massive illegal industry bootlegging.
Run by gangsters, basically.
Exactly. Armed, organized groups. And crucially, These groups learned specific skills: smuggling, bribery, intimidation, supply chain management, and yes, organized violence to protect their business.
The Tommy gun-wielding mobster became a thing.
Yes. And here's the really important lesson from that. When Prohibition ended, when alcohol became legal again, did those organized criminals just disappear? Did they suddenly get normal jobs?
No, of course not.
No. They already had the skills, the networks, the organization, the capacity for violence. They just pivoted. They moved into racketeering, illegal gambling, drug trafficking, loan sharking. The skills and the organizations survived the change in the law. They metastasized into permanent criminal structures we're still dealing with today.
Wow, so the lesson is stark. Skills learned in one context, whether it's illegal markets or wartime, are incredibly portable.
Absolutely. The Prohibition gangster learned logistics and violence. The paper argues the demobilized drone operator has learned remote killing, covert ops, electronic evasion. They will pivot too unless society actively steps in now with measures to counter that shift before it happens.
And that intervention needs to be fast, because the paper paints a picture where the market incentives for disaster are already lining up. Let's look at what the author calls the blunt core danger. Train killers out of work. The arithmetic seems terrifyingly simple.
It is chillingly simple. The source lays out three key elements driving this potential clandestine market. First, the supply of talent. You've got combat experience plus cheap, accessible hardware. That equals a huge new pool of lethal labor.
Okay, supply is there.
Second, the nature of the violence itself. Remote and inherently deniable. A killer doesn't need a passport, doesn't need to cross a border physically, doesn't risk being seen near the crime scene. All it takes is, this is a quote, a screen, a signal, a contract.
That deniability, that's the game changer, isn't it? If you're, say, a corrupt politician or a cartel leader, being able to order a hit from miles away with almost no physical link, that's incredibly attractive.
Yeah, invaluable. And third, the networks don't just vanish. The social structures built during the war, informal teams, handlers, maybe even private contractors, they can instantly flip. They become the framework for criminal syndicates or recruitment hubs trafficking this new expertise.
What strikes me is the author's emphasis. They're not primarily worried about military equipment being destroyed or even infrastructure damage in this context.
No, not in this specific proliferation context.
Yeah.
The salient, chilling fact, the bottom line, is about people being killed anonymously, cheaply, at a distance. Those very factors, anonymity, low cost, became markers of success on the battlefield. And that's exactly what a clandestine market values and will pay for. It represents a potential global erosion of basic civilian safety.
So let's be specific. Who are the potential customers who'd be lining up to hire these operators once they're demobilized?
Well, the list is depressingly broad and global. You've got organized crime syndicates, cartels. They could use these skills for targeted assassinations, witness intimidation, bypassing traditional security measures.
Makes sense.
Then terrorist groups or extremist cells, they gain the ability to conduct high-profile attacks, potentially on civilian targets or critical infrastructure, but remotely, with that crucial deniability.
Harder to trace, harder to retaliate against.
Exactly. And finally, you have corrupt actors, maybe political contractors, rogue state elements who want critics or rivals eliminated quietly. Again, the plausible deniability offered by a remote drone operator is the key selling point.
Okay, so the thread is clear, the potential buyers are there, and these tech transfer talks are happening literally now. What does the author say we need to do? What are the concrete steps to stop this from happening?
Right. The policy levers need pulling, like yesterday. Step one is fundamental, it's economic. Demobilize with purpose. The paper argues strongly against just relying on, scattered charity programs.
What does with purpose mean?
It means large-scale, well-funded government transition programs, offering paid retraining, yes, but also guaranteed desirable civilian jobs. Things where these skills have legitimate uses: infrastructure inspection, maybe precision agriculture, drone maintenance technician roles, search and rescue operations.
Creating legitimate economic paths to draw this talent away from the black market. But, is that realistic? Can a $50,000 a year job inspecting bridges really compete with potentially much higher pay from organized crime for a deniable hit?
That is the absolute core challenge, you're right. The civilian jobs can't just exist. They need to offer status, good pay, stability, a genuine alternative incentive structure. It has to be attractive enough to counter the lure of the illicit market. But economics alone isn't enough.
What else? Control the knowledge.
Yes, strict knowledge control. When military doctrine and tactics are transferred between allies, there must be clear rules. Mandated classification, redaction of the specific how-to for legal techniques. We need a very clear line between sharing lessons for defense, like counter-drone tactics, and sharing the operational tradecraft for remote killing.
Okay, so control the manuals. How do you control the individual operators after they leave the service?
The paper suggests rigorous international standards are needed. We need to move towards creating internationally recognized certifications. Think of it almost like an ICA for drones.
Could you spell that out? ICAO is the International Civil Aviation Organization, setting standards for airline pilots globally.
Exactly that model. An ICAO-like body for professional drone operators, especially those cleared for higher-risk systems. This would mean mandatory background checks, ethics training, verified employment records. It makes it much harder for someone to operate anonymously as a freelance killer for hire.
So that tackles the human side. What about the hardware? Stopping the drones themselves being easily misused.
Global mandates are needed there, too. Things like requiring tamper-resistant electronic IDs in drones, telemetry back channels that authorities could potentially access under specific legal frameworks, mandatory registration for the more capable types of drones.
So if a crime group buys a high-end drone somewhere, authorities could potentially trace it.
That's the idea. Trace modifications, track parts, and enforce this through things like trade sanctions against manufacturers or countries that don't comply with these tracking and identification requirements.
And finally, what about the legal side and the human cost for the operators themselves?
Absolutely critical. First, make commercialized deniable killing a serious international crime. The paper proposes treating mercenary drone operations as a major felony, with teeth meaning extraterritorial enforcement, using financial tools, sanctions, to go after the brokers, the intermediaries, the people who connect the operators with the clients.
Hit the money flow.
Hit the money flow. And second, the aftercare piece. It mandates long-term psychological support and civic reintegration programs for operators who conducted lethal missions. The paper makes the point that killing, even from a screen, quote, wounds minds. Proper support is crucial for reintegration and, frankly, for preventing further violence.
Connecting this all back, the urgency really comes through. Decisions being made right now in places like Washington about tech sharing could inadvertently shape whether these skills bolster defense or fuel a global threat.
That is the absolute crux of it. Policymakers are rightly focused on the kinetic defense side, how to shoot down enemy drones, the counter-UAS tech. That's vital. But this paper argues the conversation must broaden immediately. It has to include the economics of demobilization, strict controls on exporting lethal doctrine, not just hardware, and robust legal frameworks against mercenary services.
Because markets respond to incentives.
Exactly. And if the demand for anonymous outsourced killing is there, and the supply of skilled operators exists without strong countermeasures, that gap will be filled instantly.
So what does this all mean for you listening? The potential outcome of inaction isn't just black market drones. It's, and I'm quoting the source again, bodies, fear, and the erosion of public safety in places far from any front line. The paper argues we can prevent this, but it takes money, political will, international cooperation, and it needs to start now, not after the problem explodes.
That prohibition analogy is really stark, isn't it? Ending a war or changing a law doesn't magically erase the dangerous skills and organizations that grew in the shadows. If we want a different outcome this time, we have to actively choose it and invest in it before the trained killers find their new customers.
It leaves you with a heavy thought. If history, like Prohibition, tells us that dangerous skills inevitably find a market and the cost of entry for remote killing is plummeting, does that change how we should even define victory in modern conflict? Especially if winning on the battlefield risks unleashing a permanent, decentralized global market for violence, something definitely worth mulling over.